welcome to EPCC Talks again. This is part 2 of an interview that we have been doing. And by the way, Dr. Amber Archuleta Lucero, Vallaverde, teaching government. I have a guest co-host today, Professor James Stepp, to my left. And we have been in conversation with Ruben Sandoval Jr., actually about his dad, Ruben Sandoval Sr., civil rights attorney, catalyst for change in the 1970s, before social media, before all of what we know to be media. We've had him just being a powerhouse as it relates to cases that, probably people would have forgotten if it wasn't for him. Partnered with LULAC, doing a lot of instrumental things in the community for Latinos at that time. So part 2 of the conversation, we talked a little bit about the Rodriguez case. Part 1, please go back and view that. And also there's a little tiny portion about Ruben articulating his own academic and social journey. And also segue into Ruben Sandoval Sr.'s schooling and so forth. But this part 2, we wanted to look at and explore the Morales case. So I'm going to let James take over on this one, and he has some questions for Ruben. And so, James, go right ahead, friend.
Yeah, so in the prior episode, your father had, as a representative of the Santos family, tried to get the Justice Department to change their policy and apply federal charges to the police officer who was responsible. So in this case, the Morales case, your father is going to be successful in that. So I was wondering, could you please give the basic background and facts of the case?
Of course. So the Santos case was back in 1973, and in that case, my father was unsuccessful in persuading DOJ to file federal charges against this police officer, Darrell Kane. And as a result, he only faced the state charges, which was murder with malice, and he ended up getting 5 years, serving 2.5 years of that 5-year sentence, and never faced any federal charges thereafter. In the Morales case, this is kind of the part 2 of the story here. On civil rights for Latinos. So a little bit of background I was going to give you. had mentioned in the prior podcast the Hernandez versus Texas case, right? So in 1954, everybody knows about the Brown decision, this monumental decision handed down by the Warren Court. But what kind of gets lost in the story is the Hernandez case, which is just as monumental, yet very much unknown or kind of forgotten, because remember that as Latinos, we were considered a class apart. There's even a really good PBS documentary about this on the American Experience, where even though we were classified as white, in reality we were treated as though we were black. So it wasn't Jim Crow, but I like to call it Juan Crow. And people call it Juan Crow because we face the same sort of prejudice, discrimination as other minority groups. And a lot of this goes back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, when the Southwest was conquered from Mexico, losing half their territory. In the treaty, one of the things that Mexico had demanded is that the people who lived in the Southwest, and it was something like almost 80,000 Latinos, they had land, they had property, they had been here for hundreds of years, that they be given U.S. citizenship. Remember, this was something that was guaranteed.
Right.
Native Americans did not have citizenship. They won't get it till 1924. African Americans did not have citizenship. They were considered property, and this was later confirmed in the Dred Scott case. 1957, remember, they had stated African Americans are not citizens. They are considered property. So they made sure that Latinos who lived in the Southwest were given U.S. citizenship. So technically, on paper, we have the same rights and immunities and privileges as Anglo-Americans, but in reality we did not. We face the same sort of discrimination. And this is why, if you ever look at your birth certificate, I know with mine, I can't speak for everybody,
Mine too.
it says that I'm white, which I find that very almost comical, like what happened? So, but again, it was probably because there probably was a very real possibility we could have been enslaved, because we're not considered citizens or treated like Native Americans, subjected to policies of genocide and displacement. So fast forward to 1954. So in this case, for the first time, they're now saying that we have the same rights as Anglo-Americans. You understand that with a civil rights case, it was hard for a Latino to bring a civil rights case, let's say against the police, because it was how could you be denied your civil rights if it's one white person doing it to another white person, even though we were not treated as though we were white. We didn't have the same rights and privileges. So this was kind of a relatively new thing, 1954, with this Hernandez case. Fast forward a few years, with the Morales case, what happens there? Well, let's go back with the Morales case. So Morales is he's living in Castroville, Texas, and he's poor. He's a farm worker, and the sheriff, the Castroville sheriff, Frank Hayes, who was avowedly racist, white supremacist, always expresses disdain for Latinos. He's now the sheriff, and he really has it in for this guy, Morales, Richard Morales. So Morales, he had been in trouble a little bit with the law here and there. Again, these people are not ideal citizens, right? They're not model citizens, but they were still being denied their civil rights. So he was supposed to have sold, I guess, 2 calves to a rancher. The rancher had paid for the calves. Morales did not deliver the calves, and so there was a warrant that was issued for his arrest. Now, eventually what was worked out was that Morales would go ahead and compensate for the money he had taken. He was having some financial difficulties. So the warrant that was initially given was invalid. But Frank Hayes, again, he really had it in for Morales, decided to use that now invalid warrant to go to where he lived, and he lived like in a shack, not even a house. You couldn't even call it a house. And he takes Morales into custody and takes him outside of Castroville, out in the scrub, and begins to interrogate him, begins to beat him, and eventually he kills him with a shotgun. And the deputies who were with Sheriff Hayes, they were told to leave. And so when they inquired what had happened to the suspect, to Morales, the sheriff said that he had struggled with him. He had tried to take away his shotgun, and in the ensuing struggle, Morales was accidentally shot. Or first he said he had ran away. He had run off into the scrub. Then later he shot him by accident. So, but in reality, what had happened is that Hayes got his family. It's almost like a tragedy, like a Greek tragedy. He gets his family involved, and he's able to persuade his wife, his sister-in-law, and his daughter to take the body of Morales. And they drive the body 400 miles out from Castroville, near the Texas-Louisiana border, on some property that they have out there. And they bury him. And it wasn't until the Texas Rangers got involved in the investigation that they began to interrogate the family members. And so I believe it was the wife that finally took the Rangers to the spot where the body was buried. And so now Hayes is arrested, but again, he's claiming that it was a struggle, it was an accident, and so he is charged with aggravated assault. He should have been charged again with capital murder, just like in the Santos case. And but it's aggravated assault. And the other thing too, very wisely, his lawyers argued for a change of venue. And so instead of being tried in Castroville, where there was a somewhat, there was a small but sizable Latino community, San Angelo was predominantly white, and that's where we had the venue changed to, where he would have obviously a more sympathetic jury, and they had the case there. And even though he was found guilty, he was only given 2 to 10 years for aggravated assault. He was not given murder, even though it was clearly a case of cold-blooded murder.
Yes.
So again, it's almost a repeat of the Santos case. The Mexican-American community, remember, Castroville is very close to San Antonio. The community there is outraged. They're the Latino community. This time now, you have some heavy hitters getting involved. And namely, you have Henry B. Gonzalez. Congressman Gonzalez, first Latino elected to Congress from Texas, a St. Mary's graduate, I may add, just like me. And so he got involved. He began to partner with my father. My father represented the Morales family, represented the wife of Morales and the family. And this time, and they got Maldiv involved. They had LULAC involved. And again, they went to the Carter administration, tried to persuade DOJ to take the case and file civil rights charges against the sheriff. Now, this had never happened before. Going back to what I had said originally, it was hard to charge a white sheriff with violating the civil rights of technically a white person.
I get it.
But we're not treated as though we're white. So that's another reason why they didn't take the cases. If it was, let's say, a sheriff killing an African American, then you can argue that there was a denial of civil rights because of race. But they try to make this argument that it was not based on race, even though it was. And so that was another reason why these cases were not taken. There had been a few cases where there were civil rights charges brought against the police, for example, think of Mississippi burning and cases like that. They have brought cases against the law enforcement, but again, it was for African Americans. This had not been done for Latinos. Yeah. This is the first time it's going to happen.
Wow.
But my father, along with LULAC and Maldiv and Congressman Gonzalez, they persuade DOJ, and this time they take the case. Mm-hmm. They take the case, and I think it was in 1977. They take the case and they file. They impanel grand jury. The grand jury brings an indictment, and they try Sheriff Hayes a second time for the violation of the civil rights of Ricardo Morales or Richard Morales, denying him his Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment, due process rights, along with this denial of equal protection clause, and he's found guilty. And this time he's given, it's a federal conviction, and he's given life in prison. And so I believe after he served his time with the state penitentiary, he was sent to federal prison, and he died in federal custody in 1998.
Wow.
So this was the big win.
Yeah,
and this is the first time it had happened.
Yeah,
so this is the groundbreaking. This is setting a precedent.
For sure.
And so this is why now, whether it be Latinos, African Americans, or some other minority group, if they can argue a violation of federal civil rights, they have an easier time winning that case. They did it to the police officers in the Rodney King beating. Probably the most famous example, but it's happened numerous times. Think of we were talking about the George Floyd case.
Yeah.
The Minneapolis police officers there, remember, they got hit with both the state charges for killing George Floyd, but they also got hit with federal charges for violating the civil rights of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And so that's what's so monumental about the case.
It really is.
And it was so famous that they made a play. They made a play about the Santos case. In that case, the play was called Murder with Malice, the charge that the officer was given rather than capital murder. And the person who wrote the play, a real famous Mexican playwright, Victor Banda. And it was performed in Mexico City, numerous places. I saw it performed in Juarez maybe 25 years ago. And Dr. Morton now has the rights to that play.
Yeah.
Because
retired from University of California, Santa Barbara, I believe.
That is correct.
Right?
That is
yeah,
correct.
Dr. Charles Morton.
Yes, and he used to work at UTEP. Yeah, a long time ago. And so, but Victor Banda has passed away, so now Dr. Morton has the rights to the play. And then, of course, Dr. Morton wrote the play about this case, and this is called The Many Deaths of Daniel Rosales. So that play was out there for many, many years. I had no idea there was a play about my father and his civil rights cases because of the name.
Yeah,
I was familiar with Morales,
of course, yeah.
but I
Morales,
wasn't who was
not connecting
Rosales.
For sure.
And it wasn't until I met Dr. Morton, and the reason I met is because my neighbors were two UTEP professors, and and one of them was the vice president of UTEP, academic vice president, Dr. Bristol. And Dr. Bristol says, "Oh, I know Dr. Morton." He goes, "He was my student, and he used to work at UTEP." So he got me in touch with him, and so we got to become pretty good friends. And so that's where I heard the story. He says, "Well," he goes, "what happened?" He goes, "When he was working on his dissertation, I guess the committee told him, well, write a play about some kind of major or contemporary issue in the news." And so that was the big story of the day. It was kind of the George Floyd of its day. And
really was.
so I think it was in the New York Times. They had talked about the Morales case, and at this time, I don't know if DOJ had taken the case yet or not. So he starts doing his research, and so he gets to meet my father. Remember, my father was kind of like the Ben Crump.
I know.
Yeah,
He was.
of his day, right?
Really,
I mean,
he
if anybody,
was.
any injustice, that had that a Latino family had to face at the hands of the police, he was your guy you turned to. And so that's how they got to meet, and he interviewed him. They got to be friends, and so he wrote the play. But once he finished the play, then the committee said, "Well, we got a problem here. You're using the real names of these people,
Right.
and we're going to get sued. We're going to get sued, and so you need to change the names." So instead of the many deaths of Richard Morales, it became the many deaths of Danny Rosales, and and my father's, instead of him being the attorney, Ruben Sandoval, he becomes, they turned him into a woman.
Yeah, a female
And
attorney.
so,
yeah.
and her name
From
is
Harvard, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
yes. And her name is Saldivar. Saldivar. And so, and she is a Latina attorney from Harvard, which I'm sure none of them existed back in the 70s.
Right.
But from what Dr. Morton told me, that my father was heartbroken that he'd been changed into a woman.
Yeah. I heard that podcast.
Yes.
He was upset. Yeah.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
And so, but
But that play's been all over, Ruben. From that previous podcast that you were on, the Vanguard, D.C., New York, Cuba.
yes.
And there's been multiple iterations, right?
Yes.
I mean, I remember Dr. Morden was talking about how he would add layers to the story over time, especially with the focus on it really being a Greek tragedy, because this man is murdered. Of course, that affects his family, and then the sheriff's whole family is drawn in, tears apart the community. I remember too that you were discussing that you actually sat in on a version of the play and didn't realize it was about your father.
I remember. Yeah, UTEP, I think you were
Yes,
right?
yes, it was at UTEP, and I had no idea until I saw like the newspaper cutouts, and
You're like, what?
I was like, what? I'm trying to think the person who directed the play, but yes, it was just kind of an odd thing to see a play there at UTEP, and it's about my father, and I had no idea that there was going to be a play about him.
Yeah.
There was another.
But how legacy, right, lives
Yeah.
on.
It was like it was very surreal. It reminded me of when I was an upper division poli-sci student, and I remember the professor there we're covering civil rights, and so she pops in VHS. Remember, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they're doing this interview with my father, and this is in class, and people are looking at me. Is that your father? I guess, it looks like him. And it was just kind of there's been some surreal moments like that where these things have happened. Now, again, with Dr. Morton, now that I realize, hey, you did a play about my father, and it's pretty successful. It's well known. He's trying to encourage me to have the play performed as many times as possible. We had it at the Chamizal.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that happened during the government shutdown. Remember when Trump was in office, we had the government shut down, and so they only did a reading. Then, now it hasn't been performed at UTEP for quite a while. And however, I was able to persuade the theater teacher, Mr. Morales, at my school at Coronado. And so he did put on a production. And so 2 years ago, we had the play, The Many Deaths of Danny Rosales, the high school version, and it was actually very good. In fact, in many ways, it was probably better than the original. I like the way he did it. He kind of shortened it, and he kind of overlaid it with some modern music. And remember,
cool.
This is right after the George Floyd and
heaviness, for
yeah,
sure.
and this is when you had the social justice movement at its height, in this recent iteration. So, well, we had it at the school. I was quite proud that we had it there. We're trying to bring it back. Maybe we can persuade EPCC.
Yeah.
Maybe to
We're
have it
talking.
here.
We're talking about it. Maybe next year, right?
I would love that. I would love that.
Yeah, doing it large, doing it a little different, doing it larger. Yeah, we're in, Rob. We are in, Ruben.
We can
for
have
sure.
that, and can actually have the actual author of the play be present,
Of course.
to discuss.
And we'd like to do it before a live audience.
That would be
At
wonderful.
BV, so students can chime in and ask questions. I mean,
Exactly.
we see this later, right? You can tune it in later, but to have a live audience where students can ask questions to Dr. Morton, to you,
Have they ever considered making a film about this? Any?
I've been asked about that. Again, one of the few times I saw my father growing up, and fast forward to when I was in college, and I remember my father calling me, and he says, I'm coming out to L.A., you want to meet up for dinner? And of course, I thought he was coming out to see me. No, he was going out there because he was in talks with somebody who was going to make a movie about him or about his cases. Now, what came of that? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think. I know that there have been some plays, not plays. There was a movie that was made. I would have to look again. I would have to look it up because toward the end of his life, he was investigating the San Antonio Police Department. They were involved in a lot of vigilante activity. Basically, you could hire a cop, rent a cop, and if you wanted to take somebody down, this person would gladly do the work for you.
Wow.
And something like out of Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
And so he was investigating the San Antonio Police Department for vigilante activity. And so I know that they made a movie about that. But this movie had to have come out like in the early 90s. But as far as I know, I think a lot of people are forgetting these cases.
That's my fear sometimes, right? I mean, we have you here. You can articulate that story. And again, anybody who's listening to us, please contact EPCC if you want to get in touch with Ruben about any of that, moving forward, something like that, a big project. But my fear is always that, we talk less about it, or we get consumed with some other thing, Ruben. And the story, our goal has been here is that we're archiving this. Somebody could look at this years later. Your great-grandchildren can look at you years later, tell this story, carry the legacy, that the word is always out there. Let me ask you something very broad. I know we're talking about your dad, and you're so knowledgeable on so many cases.
Thank you.
How do you today perceive justice? What does it mean for you when you look at justice as a whole in this country, November 2024? How do you look at it? How do you digest it, Ruben?
Well, when you look at these cases, and by the way, this case also, I was looking it up. I was trying to remind myself what the case was. This was U.S. versus Hayes. It actually my father's case actually made it to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Not quite the Supreme Court. That would be like winning the lottery. But to have one of your cases make it to the Fifth Circuit Court, so the Fifth Circuit is one of the most conservative circuit courts in the nation. And to think that they actually made a ruling that favored Latinos, people who historically have been disenfranchised. So, for a while there, it looked like we were moving in the right direction. We were getting equal protection under the law, equal justice, rule of law prevailed. We were all treated equally under the law. Now I'm seeing a lot of cronyism. I'm seeing a lot of, it seems like a lot of the work that was done with the civil rights movement is now being undermined. It blows my mind, and I talk about this even in my classes. People that benefited from the civil rights movement, and yet they've kind of turned their back on the civil rights movement. I'll use one. I'll use Clarence Thomas, my favorite justice. I'm being facetious. He benefited from affirmative action, right? He benefited from the Bakke case, and yet when his opportunity, he got to go to Yale Law School, and yet when the opportunity came before the court 2 years ago, last year in 2023, with the Harvard case, where they were still using affirmative action. It was, one of many factors, right? You cannot have a quota, and he was one of the people who sided and decided that we no longer needed affirmative action.
Yeah.
So, that's one of many, many examples.
I know.
It amazes me to think that in the 60s and 70s when, think of the time period. Racism was everywhere, and it was just something that was kind of expected. People had kind of learned to live with it. To think that these people prevailed, that you had court cases like the Hernandez case, or the Brown decision, or these two court cases with the Santos case.
Really, against all odds.
Against all odds, you didn't. And now, I don't know. I don't know if this would prevail. I don't know if we had a modern version, whether the court would be sympathetic, or would it go back to the way it was in protecting the powers that be. And I kind of see that now, with a lot of the rulings, the way things, it's almost, we've gone back to our go-to boy system. So I kind of see justice being eroded. It's disheartening, but and we look at the courts as our last resort, that they're the one institution that we see them as infallible, that they're somebody who's going to uphold the law. And now, and I think I understand why people have lost faith in a lot of the courts, especially the Supreme Court, because justices are not picked because of their knowledge of the law or because they're the best and the brightest. We pick them now because we already know how they're going to vote. We already know how they're going to decide cases. We already know their thought process. The Federal Society has decided we want to pick these judges because we know exactly how they're going to vote.
Right.
And so I think this caused people to lose faith in the system.
Yeah.
So
I hear you.
I want to be optimistic. I want to say that the courts will prevail in the end. They will uphold justice, but I see that danger, that possibility that could happen.
I hear you.
How do your students react? Are they shocked when you go over these cases in your class? I know you have a couple of assignments, and I also remember you have a big wall of shame of Supreme Court cases where perhaps the right decision
wall of
was
shame.
made.
I call them my dirty dozen. They're just important cases. Actually, a lot of the cases I put up there, and I just kind of picked the ones I like to talk about. A lot of them deal with right to privacy issues. That's another thing too. I see, for 50 years we were told we have a right to privacy, and suddenly the court's now telling us, well, not really. You don't really have a right to privacy. It doesn't really exist in the Constitution. So I bring up these cases to show how the law has evolved. But a lot of it's who you pick. It's who you nominate and who you confirm. But we now pick people because we want them to rule a certain way. At least in the past, you didn't know how a justice was going to rule. You figured they know the law, they know the Constitution. Now we're putting people on there because they interpret the Constitution in a way that we want them to. And if they think otherwise, they're not going to get nominated. They're never going to advance in their career. So, but as far as the cases, I think to them, maybe it doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem real, but I think after what happened with George Floyd, it suddenly brought it back to life. These things happen. These things are real. And so, I get different reactions. It depends on the class, but they all take an enormous interest. I think I've had a few students that have wanted to become lawyers now or pursue some kind of career, either in law or be a poli-sci major.
Right.
There's one of my former students, his name is Cal, and now he's got these big billboards all over the city, advertising his legal services. So it's kind of nice to see things like that. So if I can convince a few people to become lawyers, I remember I had wanted to be a lawyer, then I feel that, you know what, and in the end, I did a good thing. Maybe the path that I went on or that I chose in the end benefited more people than just myself.
Yeah. No, I think,
a lot more people.
Today was meaningful, Ruben, as we wrap it up. I feel that we got what we needed to do. Our goal was to talk about the two cases. And I want to tell you what an incredible colleague you are. I forgot who I was mentioning it to the other day. Just a magician in that classroom, right? You just come to life and super seasoned, super special. And you can always tell when somebody has that gift that they light up once they're in front of somebody. So thank you for being an amazing colleague. And James, thank you for being my guest co-host today.
It was a pleasure.
You're an incredibly close friend and just awesomely brilliant. And so thank you for being here. And as we wrap up, one last question, Ruben. What advice would you give to a younger Ruben?
Oh, that's a separate podcast.
That's part 3.
Yeah. Oh, I got to think about that one for a while.
It is. We always do that. I think we did it to the dean. We always like, what do you get? Because it's very
don't worry so much about the future. As a young person, I was very insecure, very worried. What am I going to do? Yeah. I had a lot of doubts about pursuing or going into education. And now that I've been doing it for a while, I love it. I have a passion for it. I mean, I could retire at any point that I want. I would like to, but I don't because I have a passion for the subject and for the topic. And now I'm taking on this new endeavor, and that's to teach Mexican-American studies or Chicano studies, which I think ties in perfectly with this subject matter. And so I'm kind of excited about maybe offering some new courses and kind of experience, because I do have a little bit of a, personal connection
course
to
you
these
do.
things.
Yeah.
So yeah,
no,
I guess
best wishes
younger
with
me
that.
would tell, or older me would tell younger me, don't worry about the future so much. It'll all work out. It all works out in the end. Just stay, be persistent, be tenacious, and continue pursuing what you actually enjoy. And so maybe I did make the right decision, because like I said, by the time I was in college, I was thinking, well, maybe teaching would be something I'd like to do. I have a passion for it, but at the same time, I was worrying, it doesn't pay very well.
Yeah.
How am I going to pay the bills?
Big picture stuff.
Yes,
You got
and
to.
so but there are things obviously more important than money. We say that now that we have a little bit of money, now that we're securing our careers. But yes, I would tell myself, don't worry so much. Just pursue what you like, and just be good at it.
Yeah.
And tell the story, share the story, because at some point, someone else will have to tell it for you. We will pass on these stories generation to generation. So I'm glad that you're archiving this. I'm glad you're doing a podcast, because as I said before, I think we're beginning to forget about these momentous events in the civil rights movement. We're forgetting what people did for us, how people literally sacrificed their lives or pursued it as their lifelong mission to make sure that everyone had the same rights under the Constitution. I think that's kind of what happened with this last election. You look at a lot of, of course, people come up to me, why did La Raza vote for Trump? Why? And there's a lot of issues. Obviously, I think, the economy was number one. But I also think that people are forgetting that a lot of the opportunity that people have now would not have happened had they had the civil rights movement not happen. Because it was a denial of not only equal access to the law, equal justice, but it was also economic opportunity. You were denied because of the color of your skin, because of the ethnicity that you were. So I think people are forgetting that. We need to remind people.
Yeah, you're right.
You know what? Okay. I understand economics are very important, but don't forget the people that fought really hard to give you that opportunity to vote, to pursue whatever field you want to go to, and you didn't face discrimination because you were of the wrong ethnicity, the wrong skin color. And I think so the story needs to be told.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's
Ruben.
part
Thank
of
you.
our calling. Yeah,
Yes.
really our role in society.
No, I appreciate both of you. Thank you. So we're wrapping up for today. This was part 2 with Ruben Sandoval Jr. Please tune into part 1, also talking about Ruben Sandoval Sr. And we appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much, and we will see you shortly. Thank you.